Vlad Mykhnenko is a professor of geography and political economy at the University of Oxford and a fellow of St. Peter's College, Oxford. He is an economic geographer specialising in geographical political economy. His academic focus is on challenging the conventional wisdom of urban and regional development within the transition economies of Eastern Europe, especially Polish Upper Silesia and the Ukrainian Donbas. Vlad has produced over 140 research outputs, including books, articles, conference papers, and research reports. He is originally as well from Donbas, Ukraine, and we will be, of course, touching upon that because that is one of the key issues. The economics, reconstruction, and devastation of Donbas is something we're going to be talking about. Well, thank you to everybody who is supportive of the channel, who tunes into these videos, and especially if you add comments, likes, etc. And thank you to everyone who is supporting our project this year to run events looking at the situation, especially in Ukraine, but also the wider geopolitical aspects of that. As many of you know, we have got some new events forthcoming. They will be hopefully in London, Oxford, Berlin, but we also have a trip coming up to Lviv, Kiev, and Odessa. So thank you to everyone who is supporting to help make that happen. Of course, there is a financial aspect to all of this, and it's much appreciated to everyone who helps support that. Vlad, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a very long time, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the channel.
Likewise, Jonathan. Thanks a lot for inviting me. As you know, I'm a big fan of your channel. I've been following a lot of the interviews you've done. It's really amazing job you're doing. Not to mention, obviously, your relentless support for Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, those words are hugely appreciated from someone with your gravity and experience, and it's always humbling to know that people like you are tuning in. Um, let's start. This is probably the only geopolitical aspect we're talking about because the rest we're talking about, recovery, economy, and the challenges of a future sustainable economy in Ukraine. But let's start with the geopolitical angle, and this is this so-called minerals deal. So much has been talked about this, but I think very little about the mechanics and the economics of it. Is the minerals deal a sort of clever strategic sleight of hand, as it were, on the part of Ukraine? Because it seems to me to actually turn a profit, either for the US or for Ukraine, is actually rather a complicated business to turn these so-called minerals into a genuine profit.
I do agree. I think we moved on, as we've seen, from rare earth minerals and critical minerals to a wider kind of perspective on the economy itself. Uh, we are working on some, I wouldn't call them leaks, but some of the documents that were released through various Western newspapers like the Financial Times. So we had the first deal, the first agreement that Steve Bessent brought to Kiev with a bunch of his friends from administration uh, back before Zelensky's visit to the White House. And that was the original deal that was extremely damaging to Ukraine. As you remember, or your viewers remember, they wanted Zelensky to sign it immediately on spot, and they waited 14 hours for the Ukrainian administration to read or translate and read that document before being told that this is impossible to be signed, to great annoyance of Stephen Bessent, the Treasury Secretary. Uh, After that, the document was released. We saw that Americans wanted 500 billion worth of stuff in exchange for the previous aid that Biden's administration provided. So that was extremely strange. Then we had this kind of period of negotiations, and the negotiated softer deal was supposed to be signed when Zelensky visited Trump during that memorable event earlier this year. And after that, the deal was frozen, and Americans sent another document to Kiev, a much longer document, which again Financial Times provided us with. I have read it fairly carefully. I've noticed that it is a copy paste from other documents, because the bullet numbering and bullet points do not match the structure. So it is a mishmash of something else. What is intriguing for me, I'm not an international commercial lawyer, is that the the vehicle between a Ukrainian government, U.S. administration, through the U.S. International Development Corporation, the vehicle is proposed to be a Delaware state limited partnership, a specific type of partnership formed under the laws of the state of Delaware. And Delaware is the tax haven, the kind of the more laissez-faire, the most laissez-faire state in the U.S. in which most companies want to incorporate because of its really pro-business like character. And also, I've noticed in the deal itself is that we had, in addition to general partners, i.e., the Ukrainian government and the U.S. International Development Corporation, you have specific partners, which are called, I think, in law, limited partners. And U.S. had stated 6 limited partners, in which none of them was listed. But the limited partners are the ones who will get all the benefits from the deal. So the limited partners are the partners who are supposed to be getting back the money. We don't know who they are. And the limited partners are really having the limited liability part of it, whereas the general partners, the Ukrainian government and the US government, have full liability. So, suspicions is why exactly we're having a limited partnership, a specific actually type of a commercial vehicle, which is usually used for private equity, for venture capital, and for real estate. They're not used for international development deals. And also that we don't know really who will be the specific partners who will get in benefits on the US side. And these names will be confidential according to the agreement that we've seen, right? So the suspicion is that there will be some friends of the administration, or maybe administration, maybe Donald Jr. or his mates or his wife or somebody else, as specific beneficiaries of this comprehensive minerals deal, including infrastructure, ports, right, gas, oil, coal, pipelines, railway station, railway links between the mine and the port, and so the exploitative nature of it is quite evident. The kind of dodgy legal structure is also quite evident. I wouldn't call it dodgy, but quite peculiar for the purposes of international development deal.
Opaque, I think that's a good
Opaque,
word, isn't
yes,
it?
exactly.
Yeah.
Opaque. Also the insistence on the confidentiality clause, not disclosing the specific partners, is also quite intriguing, I would say. And therefore, it's not surprising that it's taking Ukrainian government so many months now. And I think I've heard the figure of 140 million euro, hiring actual expensive lawyers, including European lawyers, to read this, to check whether this is compatible with anything else, whether it's compatible with Ukrainian law, so it's compatible with European the accession procedures, and therefore it is not surprising that the current state of the negotiations on this rare earth and minerals critical infrastructure deal is that we had a memorandum of intent, not of understanding, a little bit higher than MOU, memorandum of intent that was signed last week or 2 weeks ago between the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine and again Stephen Bessent for Treasury, which is supposed to lead to a Ukrainian Prime Minister visit, Mr. Shmyhal visit, which was supposed to happen this week. We already on Friday, and it didn't happen, to sign this bigger comprehensive deal, which we haven't seen the details of at all. So none of the newspapers were released, were leaked the actual deal. So we don't know what the final deal would look like. And obviously, I would argue that the potential for it to be signed this week or next week is quite low, given what happened in the wider geopolitics of it. But I think we should be quite concerned. That's my bottom line. It is opaque. It's quite intriguingly strange. It's on the one hand quite detailed on legalese, but it's quite really empty on any kind of monetary or tons of minerals or dollars front. I am rather concerned.
And of course, if the liability is on the state entities and not the private individuals, how would that reflect investment? And here's where I think your knowledge of these extractive industries and indeed the state of the Donbass is important, because to even start to get this stuff out of the ground would surely require a huge investment, not just in the mines themselves, but in building the local skills base, trying to rebuild the denuded population, get people to return to those regions. There are multiple problems there. I mean, parts of Donbass clearly were run down even before not just the full-scale war, but the long war began. People were already moving westwards because the tech industries and the more vibrant industries are located in the sort of Lviv Kiev corridor. Um, there's those challenges, and then there's the infrastructure itself, because even though some of the existing infrastructure is clearly earmarked to be included in this deal, a lot of new infrastructure would be required. Where is the burden for building all this going to land? The many, many billions of dollars one assumes, before you can even start to extract minerals from the ground.
It's a really a great question. And also, in addition to the where the money is going to come from, who is going to pay for it, and also who is going to invest and who is going to be long-term enough, right? Mines built in years and years, and processing industries will take years to be built from scratch, effectively. So we're talking about 10-year process, and most of the big mining companies are not American. Uh, it is not surprising that 90% of all rare earths are digged out and processed in China, given that the scale, size of the country, the amount of the workforce resources that they have, and the amount of also a certain neglect for environmental damage, because we are talking about really damaging process for the environment. Admittedly, the Donbas, as you, Jonathan, visited recently, I know, is damaged already beyond belief. And it's also heavily mined with real mines, land mines, anti-tank mines, anti-personnel mines.
That's right.
Uh,
Many of the mines are flooded as well, aren't they, with heavy metals and toxic elements. There's
there is a huge invisible ecological disaster happening in the Donbas generally. There were 200 plus mines 20 years ago. Uh, Almost all mines on the Russian occupied territories were shut down and led to flood. So what happens when the mines are flooded, i.e., to be precise, they're not flooded, they are not pumped out. The water is not pumped out. So the mine water comes up and up and up and up and up to the ground level, and it pollutes the drinking water, right? And also it creates a lot of other horrible problems in terms of soil erosion and toxification of everything. But effectively, the whatever wells that people use now in the Donbas to drink water from, because there is no centralized water supply, will and are being polluted by the rising mine of shaft water levels, underground water levels. So that's a huge problem that has not been resolved. And of course, the Russians are not going to pay for it. So there will be a lot of areas around the coal mining towns and settlements in eastern Ukraine that will be depopulated and actually impossible to live. And the toxic environment will just drive people out. Whatever is remaining there will just be driven out. So that is one big problem. If you add to that the excavation of critical rare earth and critical minerals, which is also a huge extractive process with a lot of waste, obviously. Those slag heaps that you've seen in Donbass
yes,
everywhere,
we saw some of those extraordinary. Yeah,
extraordinary strange structures. There'll be more, you need more of those. Also, the processing of rare earth and critical minerals needs a lot of water. And as you know yourself, Eastern Ukraine is quite dry, and there is only one big river. And if everybody is going to be trying to drink water from it, but also take water from industrial processes, that will create a lot of problems for the water resources. So,
And Kakhovka Dam was destroyed, so that
and
was one of the
Kakhovka Dam
large
was abs
resources. Yeah.
absolutely a large resource for drinking drinkable water that supplied water to the Crimea, the Crimean Peninsula itself, and also obviously surrounding areas in terms of irrigation of land. So water will be big pressure on water, big pressure on environmental damage that's already happening without any rare earth been dug out. And as you said, a lot of actual unexploded devices and actual real mines and the mining itself will take a lot of time because you can't really dig stuff if you know it's all can blow out in your face. So the contamination that is an extremely costly process, of course. Dealing with brownfields, as we all know, is extremely costly process. And so before even you start digging for some rare earth, the clearance will take years, and also a lot of funds. And so you know, it, I'm not surprised that the Americans or the current administration had oil and gas and coal a bit more kind of normal resources there because they understand that rare earth are could be really not many of them, but also it's extremely difficult to deal with them. So yes, big environmental questions.
Mm. And of course, the rare earths themselves, that is, of course, an essential commodity for modern technologies. Is Ukraine home to unique deposits of various elements, which are becoming more strategically important as we decouple from China? Or is there another little sleight of hand here? Are the deposits not necessarily of the scale or the unique character that perhaps has been sort of bigged up? Or are the geological surveys now so old that actually we're not sure what's in the ground and what's available? What's the reality in terms of what's thought to be these treasures under the Donbas region?
Yeah, the point about rare earth, they're not really rare, right? They're everywhere. Uh, and the good thing if you can find them in big quantity and big concentrations. And as you said, the geological surveys were done in the Soviet times when people didn't know what they are looking for anyway. Uh, the contemporary estimates are really of the scale, really dodgy, and I wouldn't trust them. Uh, lithium resource may be, methane obviously, but apart from those two elements, the rest is rather speculative. So I'm not exactly worried about the kind of the treasures because I don't think there may be a lot of treasures there under the ground. Uh, but I'm worried about the process of digging them out, and of course, in a post-war reconstruction period, the cost will be the most important thing, and so the cheapest way to dig it out will be the most damaging way, and therefore that might actually, although the Donbas is already on this kind of deathbed, but it could be the final nail in the coffin of the region.
And let's turn to green steel. There's some other questions about Donbass I'd like to ask as well. But let's turn to this idea of green steel because, of course, Donbass was known for its heavy industry, huge investments in the Soviet period there, which built on the foundations of industrialization in the East. In the 19th century, that was the core part of the Russian Empire that kick-started that process of industrialization with foreign entrepreneurs. Now that is devastated as well. Um, we've talked about this, off camera before, but I find it fascinating the idea that actually Donbass is not necessarily the ideal location for a revived steel industry, especially one that may be built on the concept of green steel that you've written about. And we'll put links to those papers and the sort of electric arc furnaces and all this sort of stuff that I pretend to understand but don't. But I'm very much hoping you'll explain to the audience why Donbass may not be the cradle of a future heavy industry in Ukraine.
Yes. So the basic, I'm not a metallurgist myself, but obviously I had to dig into this. And growing up in the Donbas, you see steel mines, steel works everywhere. So you kind of trying to at least understand more than other people do. So currently, the traditional way of producing steel is that you have obviously the main input is iron ore, and the higher content of ferrum in it is better, and the lower is worse. The iron ore that Ukraine has vast reserves of, and that's really proven and has been digged out for centuries now, around Kryvyi Rih, more or less, most of it, that Dnipropetrovsk Oblast area. The content of Ukrainian iron is about 30, 33, 35, so it's not that high, and hence Ukraine then tend to beautify it, kind of enrich. But I think the methodological term is beautification of iron ore to the 67%, which is the standard, kind of good standard, the gold standard of iron ore. Then you take iron ore and then you effectively heat it, burn it with a fuel, and until recently we used a particular type of coal, coking coal, in which you a bit like what you do with wood when you have the charcoal, right? So it's a kind of a charcoal of coal made of which is a kind of a very light little tiny pellets, very light, grayish looking. So you add that into the mix as a fuel, and you add also some other minerals to take out the impurities from iron ore, limestone in particular, and effectively because the coke is so energy rich, the furnace can reach thousands of degrees centigrade. It melts the iron. It melts the iron ore. The iron then takes out. It leaks sort of into the particular process. Then it's put into another furnace in which oxygen is pumped to increase the level of temperature to unbelievable degrees. And after that, and after that you can see that kind of a big conveyor thing with the melting red liquid coming out. That's the kind of pig iron. Well, it's iron that's coming out, and then it's cooled, and then it's processed, and then it's again heated up, and then some things are added into it to create steel. Yes, from iron to steel, a couple of melting and processes happens. All of that is using coke as a chip, and also extremely energy rich fuel. Obviously, carbon itself is carbon, and hence
Not
obviously
clean. It's a
not
dirty
clean.
fuel.
It's a dirtiest fuel, and obviously CO2 emissions of traditional steel is about 8% of the whole global CO2 emissions. So it is the most kind of alongside cement industry, steel industry, and cement industry are the two most CO2 greenhouse producing industries in the world in terms of manufacturing. So what you're trying to do is to remove coal as a fuel, right? And traditionally we used electricity at a different type of furnace. So effectively, instead of burning it with coal, with coke, you're burning it with increasing, electrical charge, right? And that obviously requires a lot of electricity, and also the traditional electric arc furnaces do not reach the levels of heat to such a level that you can create what in British media now is called virgin steel, steel from raw materials, right? So traditionally, electric arc furnaces use the scrapped cars, all the scrap metal that is there to kind of melt it again and produce steel, which is slightly less purified and obviously have more additives and probably not as good as the virgin steel. So
So
the
you'd use
idea,
it for tin cans. You wouldn't use it for high precision, engineered components for
yes, you
complex machines.
you wouldn't use it for aircraft manufacturing or for medical equipment manufacturing. Uh, so the green steel idea is that you move towards renewable fuels. Yes, you move towards electricity, but also you can start thinking about producing hydrogen, which can be used as an actual fuel itself. So you can burn hydrogen itself, which is quite calorific in a way, and so you can effectively replicate what you do with coke using hydrogen, which is when it's used, it just creates water, right? So there is no CO2, there is no pollution, there is no emissions of nasty stuff. So using hydrogen in the process can actually help us to create virgin steel. So electric arc furnaces are great for lots of things, but using hydrogen itself can help us to create actual virgin steel from raw material, from iron ore, and create high quality steel for very sophisticated things. Now, what you need, obviously, you need a lot of electricity. You need a lot of renewable energy, to be precise, to do all of this. And so, but what you don't need, you need coal. And the reason the Donbas exist, and the original name is Donetsk coal basin, right, is because of coal that was found there in 60, well, found in late 18th century, but was developed first with the Welsh, the British investment of John James Hughes, who came from Merthyr Tydfil in 1867, and brought all his engineers and started digging coal. And therefore they used the iron ore of Kryvyi Rih and brought it to this area because coal was bulkier than iron ore for some reason. And so effectively the Donbas steel industry grew on iron ore imported from the neighbor. Well, it was the same region, like Katerinoslavska Gubernia was the same region originally, but it was kind of moved from the westernmost part of this province to the easternmost part of this province using the original coal and starting producing iron there. And also gradually they started to move, also shift coal back and also produce steel around Kryvyi Rih. In fact, we have 2 points of steel production in Ukraine around Kryvyi Rih and around Donetsk. In Donetsk, you're effectively focusing on coal and bringing iron ore. In Kryvyi Rih, you're focusing on iron ore and bringing coal. But effectively, those two areas of steelmaking are based on these two biggest inputs, coal and iron ore. If you remove coal, then of course you still need this bulky, heavy resource, which is iron ore, which is there around Kryvyi Rih, somewhere in Poltava region, but it's effectively on the west bank of Ukraine, quite a lot of it. And so probably you will have to use the same, brownfield sites of the current steelmaking, just retrofitting it for green steel production. But what you must have is the enormous amount of renewable energy. And so, which doesn't really require you anything in Eastern Ukraine. Renewable energy, obviously, solar comes, the best areas are southern Ukraine, around Crimea, right, and southern Ukraine, Khersonska, Mykolaiivska, Odessa, Zaporizhzhia oblasti, and wind resources are kind of northern western part of Ukraine. There's a lot of wind. So effectively, to produce green steel, you would want to create greenfield steel mills in where one of the resources are. Either it is renewable energy, combined wind and solar, or where the iron ore is, or even better, next to the actual exporting ports. 75% Ukrainian steel before the war was for export.
And that's
So that
down
is
Odessa and sort of Azov Coast area. Yeah.
so originally it was Mariupol port, Berdyansk, yes, and then the ports around Odessa. But obviously Mariupol was the most important, given that steel was produced there in Mariupol, but also in Donetsk and the rest of the Donbas region. So you need a factory to move them closer to the ports for export. And also, given that Ukrainian accession to the EU, you also need to move them closer to Europe. And therefore, when you look at kind of the new map we produced for the green steel, you see a lot of strange kind of steel mill locations in Volynska, in kind of Lvivska Oblast, or, in kind of northwestern part of Western Ukraine, where there is a lot of wind resource, and also is next to the Polish border. So rail exporting and maritime exporting are the two actually more important points than actually iron ore itself. So we envisage in a green steel revolution of Ukraine is that obviously the Kryvyi Rih and surrounding areas will be still heavily producing steel because iron ore is there anyway, and electricity is weightless, right? It's very easy to transport electricity, but also there will be quite a cluster of new green steel mills around sort of Odessa Oblast near the ports, and a cluster near the Polish railway hub border area. So it'll be kind of three new, one old, but two new areas where there will be green steel manufacturing. And obviously there won't be, and you don't really need it, to start rebuilding Azovstal and Illicha
Yeah.
and Donetsk steel plant, because that's actually now is not as relevant.
Yeah. and multiple challenges. We'll come on, at the end to some of those challenges. Another area which is interesting, and I'd be keen to read a bit more about it, is the idea that Ukraine is an ideal place perhaps for another new industry, which is data centers, which are incredibly energy hungry. Because if you're producing this sort of green, sustainable energy, and Ukraine is also a tech powerhouse, and I think will become more so in future, especially if it becomes, let's say, one of the sort of core sort of military defense of Europe kind of centers, which of course I think it will, and maybe strategically becomes a leader in AI because that is the growing frontier. These are all hugely data intense industries which require a ton of electricity, plus countries that have a lot of space with lower population centers. Again, there's a perfect conjunction here for potential future industries. Highly strategic, and it's the higher end of the economic pecking order as well, rather than sort of dirty, traditional, 19th century heavy industry. Do you foresee, this becoming an important element of consideration as well?
And this is where kind of the geopolitics, the dirty word, and normal geography and normal the physical elements come in because whatever you do going forward, we'll need a lot of electricity, we need a lot of renewable energy, right? And solar and wind, as I said, wind is kind of Western Ukraine is heavy, but solar. The first and biggest solar plants in Ukraine exist in Crimea. So Crimea is the best for solar, obviously, and that's an important area because it's the southernmost. It's a lot of sun. It's almost subtropical, some of it. And then, of course, the left bank of Khersonsk Zaporizhia Oblast is also quite important for solar. So the Russian occupied territories now, those three areas, the Crimean Peninsula and the occupied Khersonsk and Zaporizhia Oblast, that's quite actually important, not just for agriculture and stuff, but also quite important for renewable energy because that's where there's a lot of potential for it. And hence, that bit needs to come into consideration, of course, and all these peace deals will have to bear in mind that the Ukraine really need to recover those lands because for actual value, the future value of it will be higher than the current value of it. So I envisage that Ukraine will need quite enormous amount of investment into renewable energy. Our bill for the green steel is 62 billion to kind of get back to the pre-war level, but without the use of coal. But out of them 62 billion themselves, only 9 billion is for actual steel making, the furnaces, the retrofitting, the creation of new steel plants. 45 billion of the 62 billion bill is for renewable energy. And that's only for steel industry, steel making. So if you add the new industries, ICT, data centers, that will create the appetite will be enormous, right? And you've seen the global kind of demand graphs that are going like the hockey stick, right? And so there will be a lot of demand for renewable for energy generally, but Ukraine in its accession to the EU from 2030 will have to comply with the what the EU called the cross-border adjustment mechanism, i.e., carbon tax, carbon tariff. So from 2030, and both the EU and the UK will start to charging quite significant and steep growing taxes, tariffs on imported goods according to their CO2 content. And as I said, current steel is extremely CO2 intensive. And therefore, they're trying to push both the domestic producers, which will be taxed also heavily on CO2, and also try to push foreign producers to go green steel. So Ukrainian industry and steel industry has been the second most important industry after farming, and Ukraine's commodity export number one over every year with independence and been metals. So it is an important industry to be rebuilt, but it has to be rebuilt in a new way, not because of some fancy woke ideas, but because of clear pressures from the regulators, both in the UK and in the EU. And so the steel companies understand that. They're trying obviously to lobby to postpone the deal, but they understand that they will have to invest. And so currently we have ArcelorMittal, and Metinvest, part of the System Capital Management conglomerate, that are committed 35 billion of investment for green steel. And I said our bill is 62 billion, so at least more than half of it is already been earmarked by the two largest steel producers in Ukraine, which I think good news, great news. But we need peace, we need the borders, we need the recovery of territories, we need lots of things to be in place before that.
And the last part, this is the slightly more intangible part, but I think, significant nonetheless. And that is that where these interests are cited is important, but also having a resilient population is important, as we have seen since 2014 Maidan and the multiple revolutions that have moved Ukraine. I would say, sort of mentally westwards and
Mm.
away from the sort of Russified past, especially the sort of post-Stalin kind of period where a lot of Russian colonists were kind of obviously imported in, especially to replace the indigenous population following things like Holodomor and the purges, the Second
Yeah.
World War, that kind of stuff. Clearly, the East has had a much more intensive process of Russification. It is denuded of population. Some of the people who remain in the East, especially areas that are occupied and are in the sort of near the occupation zone, the sort of grey bees kind of territory, as
Hmm.
Kurkov would say,
Hmm.
there are many people there who do not necessarily have such a sort of conscious thought about Ukrainian culture and identity. It's much more a question of survival for many people there. There are a lot more pensioners, a lot more sort of disabled people, and there is a class of people who I believe are termed zduni, those
Hmm.
who really are kind of indifferent as to whether they live under Ukraine or Russia, or some of them may even actively be waiting for the return of Russians, or at least in their mindset. So there are all sorts of problems there that reduce democratic resilience, that reduce social political resilience, and of course make it harder to rebuild industry there. I know this is a very ramshackle question there, but there are all these sort of social political elements. And if you're going to reoccupy and try to instill a sense of not just Ukrainian identity, but vibrant democracy back into these places,
Hmm.
that's both difficult, complex, also extremely expensive.
Right. I'm an economic geographer, not a cultural geographer, and so I'll stick with the money side. I'm not a materialist, or historical materialist, but growing up in the Donbas, I kind of have a culture of looking for money first and kind of having materialistic interests covered first. Maybe it's a Homo Sovieticus legacy or not, but and so I'll hit you with this. So let's say the war stops tomorrow, and Ukraine has to be rebuilt, right? What are the estimates of damage? We have the estimates of damage from the World Bank, Ukrainian government, the EU, and the UN that says that until now, the total damage and the cost of reconstruction is coming to more than half a trillion, $524 billion. That is the Ukraine reconstruction and recovery cost. Okay, enormous sum of money. Within that money, within that overall cost of reconstruction and recovery, there is an element of damage, of direct damage, building destroyed, schools, hospitals, bridges, etc. And that sum, according to the current estimate, is $176 billion. So I'm thinking, you definitely need that sum of money to rebuild what was destroyed. A better way, maybe in a different place, but effectively, you've had a school, you need a school. So if you plug in, just imagine we found $176 billion and we plug in into Ukrainian construction industry. And let's say the reconstruction period will take 10 years, which is normal estimate for it. We have a technique called input-output analysis that tells us that $1 invested in the construction industry in Ukraine creates $3.6 for the whole economy. So when you plug in 176 billion over 10 years, just rebuilding bridges, roads, hospitals, schools is going to give us 11% of GDP growth every year for a 10-year period of time. which means that just on reconstructing what was destroyed in a pure basic level, we're going to more than double the size of the Ukrainian economy over a 10-year period of time, which means that GDP per capita will be more than double. People will be more 2.5 times richer. This is just on post-reconstruction effort. And if you add the normal 3, 4, 5% of actual growth that happens anyway, we are talking, potentially tripling the size of the Ukrainian economy from 200 billion to 600 billion, i.e., people may be 3 times as rich in 10 years' time than they are now. Whatever Zhduni thinks, they will, they might get a different proposition. It should be definitely better than the current Russian offer of
Wages going up, pensions going up,
pensions
etc.,
going up,
etc. Yeah.
etc. And also new stuff being built, and people like manifestations of recovery, right? Manifestations, ribbons being cut, hospitals, etc. Everybody loves this stuff. So it's a boom. A post-war reconstruction is a boom that is coming. And as I said, actually quite conservative estimates, I would say, of mine would say 2 to 3 times bigger size of the economy at the end of it, which is actually, Jonathan, if you think about it, that encroaches kind of Polish, Hungarian, Croatian level GDP per capita. Right? So you can catch up to the Polish neighbors
Mm.
level of income in 10 years' time by just recovering what you've lost in a better way, in a new way. And I think that's a really extremely promising future that lies ahead.
And
There
indeed,
is a
joining the
big question
EU,
mark.
yeah,
There is a
that's a
big
big, yeah,
The big question mark is labor force.
yes.
7 million people fled, lots of displacement internally, 4 to 5 million internally displaced, aging, women away, men inside. So the demographics of it are robust, and the labor force analysis is difficult because Ukraine didn't have a census since 2001. So we're running 24 years on imaginary numbers. We don't, all these population figures are kind of bogus to some extent. So yes, labor constraints will be an important element, but I would suspect that given that there will be a boom economy, and a lot of people a lot of Ukrainian refugees outside perhaps are not enjoying the living standard they used to. Uh, I would suppose the pull effect will be quite huge to pull them back from Western Europe and from Eastern Europe as well. So yes, labor constraints will be enormous, but the promised land is really quite shiny and very high hill of promised land. I'm mixing my metaphors here,
That's
but
and that helps with my intangible question as well, because whereas it may be inconceivable to take the sort of remnant population there and try to de-Sovietize them, actually it doesn't matter so much if you're pulling entrepreneurial people back from the West to rebuild the future. That's they're going to be the active element of society. You can worry a little bit less about those who are perhaps less entrepreneurial and active. That is a beneficial process in itself, and it brings with it identity and culture and all the other intangibles that are actually quite difficult to plan.
so the Donetsk before the war was a booming business-minded commercial capital of the country, or one of the commercial capitals, comparing to Dnipro probably easily, and a lot of it was built by private entrepreneurs. Yes, they had some dodgy historical links, and the first million was made in a particular way, but the first billion was made in a legitimate way, and hence Donetsk was a booming and really attractive place for the whole region, and people, the real estate prices in Donetsk 2012, 2011 were on par with most Western Ukrainian cities, actually higher. So there was already before the war quite a significant amount of IT people, right, who then relocated and moved away in 2014. Obviously, the largest Ukrainian private conglomerate, System Capital Management, was headquartered in Donetsk, including its Metinvest and DTEC branches. So it was already quite a lot of entrepreneurial spirit, wild West-like, but it was there, and therefore you would suspect that a lot of it can come back if the conditions allow for that.
We've only really got time, I think, just to briefly touch on one thing, and this is, for me, an incredibly important topic. We've talked a lot about sustainability, but also accessibility is important. And of course, we saw since, Maidan, a radical decentralization, which actually led to the sort of booms that you're talking about. So, how important are these three things? Accessibility, sustainability, and inclusion and decentralization, if we're going to have the sort of unfettered boom that we're talking about that results in places and values that are sustainable into the future.
So the decentralization reform of say 2019, or the end of it, has recreated the local authority level at a scale that is now sustainable. So it's actually enlarged local authorities into viable units with their budgets. And Ukraine is always quite a decentralized country, actually. But it was always a unitary state, but it was on the level of local government funding. It was quite a federal in its actual attributes. And so this is more decentralization, which means more money are kept and produced local level and state local level, which created exactly the resilience that the war have shown Ukrainians have. One element that is unfinished of this reform is the provincial level, the regional level, the kind of mid level of government, and that reform hasn't yet been finished before the invasion, and that is quite an important piece of the element of this jigsaw puzzle because not all markets are local, right? Your housing market is local, but your labor market is already beyond local because people commute, right? Your transport infrastructure is bigger than the local authority. You're talking about ports and airports and stuff. So you need to have a subnational but not local level, a medium tail level government, regional government that helps to coordinate some of the bigger things and not meddle into little things. And that process has stopped, and I think that needs to be accomplished. And we've seen in the Polish example, which Ukraine follows kind of, is that the creation of this quite an important provincial voivodstvo level of government did help not just create a local spirit and identity for these newly reformed regions, but also had quite a significant effect for the EU accession, right? Because the EU wants to have the subnational governments, not local government, but subnational provincial governments to deal with directly. The Brussels wants to have the provincial governance effectively talking to them about stuff, because it's obviously less of them than 100, 450 local authorities. So that layer of government has to be reconstructed. I think that is the remaining piece of the unfinished reform is the provincial level government, and that should help when it's finished. Nothing, there is no problem there. We all know what needs to be done. It needs to be finished, and that should unlock quite a lot of potential capacity at a higher level in every region. So that's for me, that's an important element that needs to be done.
Vlad, this is absolutely fascinating. There'll be so much detail in here that people on this channel, indeed on other channels, would have not heard before. We could probably talk for many, many hours, but I know you're busy. I'd love to have you back on the channel to explore related topics to this and as the mineral deal unfolds. For today, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan. Thanks a lot.